when he has this, when he puts his predictive linguistics out. It's what he calls it, predictive linguistics. Two tribes. Is it Democrat, Republican, deep state versus deep state? What is it, or all the above? Of course, I'm going to bring on Clif High from halfpasthuman.com. Clif High, how are you doing? And thanks for being on USAWatchdog.com.
Oh, it's so much fun, Greg. I couldn't not do it. So thanks for asking me.
So the report, it just has, you picked out a really good, a couple of headhunters or whatever they are. Two tribes, and the two tribes is this is a multifaceted, there's a lot of games going on, what you were telling me in the pre-interview, and it's not just that red team versus blue team. It's all kinds of teams that you don't know what's going on. Explain the definition of the two tribes.
The two tribes is a paradigm view of what's going on in our current earthbound reality at the moment. I put it all down, or a great deal of it down, to these unknown energies from space that have got our minds all jittery, so to speak. And so we're prone to contention at the moment. This will continue for at least the next 15 years. Our two tribes view is exactly as you said. It's red versus blue, Republican versus Democrat. It's gay versus conservative. It's a liberal versus conservative, liberal versus progressive. So it is everywhere there is contention. It's within the state. It's deep state versus this other part of the deep state. It's this part of the government versus that part of the government. And so it is a world of contention that we're running into now. And my point in using the two tribes metaphor or paradigm was to bring up the idea that if you recognize this, then all it takes is that recognition to step outside of the contention. You need not involve yourself in it. And it's going to exist whether you involve yourself in it or not. So my way of thinking is, I'll relax and step outside of the fight.
And you said that there would be chaos starting in the middle of March. Well, I mean, this thing with Trump spying is picking up speed. Susan Rice, unmasking people. This Deputy Secretary of Defense Farkas, who said, "Yeah, we were basically out to get him, and we were giving information to our colleagues on the Hill." And then we have Nunez, the top of that House committee, is now looking like he's stepping down, and all that. What is that? I see chaos. I mean, I see what you said was starting to happen. Go ahead. We see chaos.
Yeah, I was just saying there is chaos everywhere. The language is reflecting that. It's part of the contention. In the contention between one tribe and another, there is that boundary of chaos that exists at the edge of the contention. You're seeing it in the language in the political realm, which you are well centered in. And we see it everywhere. So you'll find that same level of chaos reflected in the online communities and the social media as a result of the advertiser boycott that began and really became effective in the first part of March. I was off by about 7 days. They started doing that on the 7th of March. And then it's also reflected.
Explain that. Explain what you were talking about. The advertiser boycott.
On the 7th of March, a big series of updates were put through in a plan that led to the advertisers boycotting ads on YouTube and to a certain extent reducing the revenues within Google search as well. It's also hit Twitter minorly and some of the other social media. And basically what it is the legacy media has decided to go at the alt media. So it's media versus media, another two tribes battle here that's shaping up.
So
chaos
the
language
mainstream
everywhere.
Media is trying to whack the alt media, like USA Watchdog.
No, not trying. They've already done that in the sense that they've demonetized almost all videos on YouTube. YouTube is redoing their algorithm down to the very bottom. There have been tens of thousands of YouTube people that made a living on it that have now essentially been fired. And it's even worse than that because they don't know if they've been fired. They just know they don't have any money coming in, and they've been told that this will fluctuate for months. They say weeks, but it's actually months. And the YouTube people just do not know how to survive. So I've been contacted by some of these individuals that are in their 20s, and this is their first business crisis. And some of these individuals were making millions of dollars. One guy that contacted me in a just a terrible state is 23 years old and has employees. He's got 11 people, members of his family and friends that work for him. And all of a sudden his revenue was flatlined and he won't be able to make payroll at the end of the very next month. And so this this is his first business crisis, and he's effectively been fired from his revenue stream. No warning in any of this, and he's actually a collateral damage. He's not a racist site. He's perfectly advertiser friendly. He tries to be a very good YouTube citizen, and so it does not matter. If you're not legacy media, if you're not one of the big brand name broadcast media conglomerates, then your advertising has been hit.
And this is mainstream media is doing this because they're getting whacked, so they're fighting
Correct.
back. So the Empire Strikes Back is what they're doing. They've had enough
Correct.
of them having their business model cut into. So the alt media has been hurting the mainstream media.
The mainstream media was dying, and it has nothing to do with the alt media. The fact that the mainstream media is dying has to do with you had to be trained in a generation to watch that stuff in order to be a consumer of that media. Everybody that is beyond a certain generation behind me was never trained that way, so they don't like it. They're never going to adapt to it, and the legacy media just doesn't get this. It thinks it's a contest between it and alt media. Alt media could go away, and legacy media is still going to die, because none of the millennials, the post-X generations, care to waste their time with it. And most of them, especially if you're under 16, you know that they all lie. And so why bother at all? So the legacy media is effectively dead, because there will be no new generation to pick up newspapers or Wall Street Journal or broadcast television or any of this. They're just not going to pick it up. It's not going to go forward. And so they will die anyway. Unfortunately, they see it as a battle, and they've decided to try and take on in their death throes, try and take on what they saw as their opposition, which is the alt everything. And in the meantime, in doing that, they hit everybody that was not alt-right or alt-political on the spectrum in the YouTube advertising. So all the people with gaming sites, with health sites, with body tip sites, fashion sites, they're all dying simply because of the mechanism, the underlying paradigm of the legacy media is kill the advertising for everybody and eliminate it. So they're willing to basically burn everything in the field in order to get the mice and the rats, as they see it, that they don't like. And they're more than willing to have that collateral damage, and we're watching that now. And that level of chaos, that language of chaos, if you go onto YouTube and stuff, or any of the social media, it has actually gotten to the level where it has altered the usual balance of language. And so let me be very clear about this. I can expect, when I run a sweep across YouTube with my spiders to do a report and pick up all the comments, and it gets all aggregated and so on, I can expect that I'll get between 7 to 9% of that language in any given run relating directly to some form of currency or money or something like that, an issue of funding or all these kind of words. I can expect 7 to 9%, and it rarely exceeds 9%. And now we're up into 19 and 20% and growing.
Wow.
And it is because it's exactly, so it is skewed. Now this is good and this is bad. So in my way of thinking, in my work, I have to acknowledge that there's been a deliberate skewing of the data. They didn't attempt to try to skew the data for me, but that was the result. So I have to work that into my algorithms as I go forward here, because this is atypical. But here's my real problem. What if indeed the atypicalness of it all, the atypicality of it, is part of the process itself? In other words, is this emotional thrashing, this huge rise in the emotional language and the release language, is that prescient of something coming? There's a lot in my data that suggests that's just the case. So here's my real problem. I can't discount all of this increase to 19% already and climbing of language now associated with money, funding, lack of money, all of the emotions around it, et cetera, et cetera. I can't discount that, because there's hints in the data in the early part of the processing for this next run that we're looking at something huge in August and September that is being exposed by the language now. Does that make sense?
Yes. What do you think that is?
I think it's a bond crash, actually. I think it's not a bond crash because I don't know how that would actually happen. I don't understand bonds really myself or debt-based instruments. But what I think is actually going to happen is something that it's not like a stock market crash. The data I'm looking at now, and I'll get more into it as I get further into the next report, but the data I'm looking at now doesn't suggest a stock market is meaningful. We may well lose 50 cents on every dollar on the stock market in just a few days, but it won't make any difference at all to anybody, according to what the data is showing me, because the real crises is in basically the crash of government, if you will. So let me back up and state that there are some things that validate my opinion on this, my early guess, my gut reaction to the data as I'm seeing it stream through. And some of those validations I went on out and did this morning. And one of them is that if you look at the top 5 search engines on the planet, and we include Chinese and Russian, then on all top 5 search engines, within the top 10, and it's actually within the top 5, in most of them, it fluctuates a bit, search term being hunted out is deep state. Now, this is very meaningful. The deep state exists because of secrecy. So if most of the people on the planet are in terms of searching, it's the top trend at the moment. This does not augur well for deep state being able to try and preserve its secrecy. So if we look at this battle, this contention between the two tribes, and we look at it with the idea of the powers that be versus the rest of us, the powers that be are attempting to shove us all back into the 1950s, where we'll sit quietly on the couch and consume broadcast media. And that's their goal, is to return to their heyday. And our data at the moment is saying that goal is simply evaporating within the, I guess we'd have to say, the build out of all of the emotions at the moment. And the emotions at the moment are projecting that projecting basically a crash of the ability of the state to function, because, and I'm saying because, this is my opinion. Okay, so we have the projection that there's going to be some kind of big government crash, funding or disruption or something.
But the bonds would be tied to the government.
Correct.
Government bonds are some of the biggest bonds out there, not corporates, not municipals, not local, state, and local. I mean, treasury bills, boons, right. Gilts. I mean, those are the biggest bonds out there.
And we've got something that is akin to a definition change, okay, relative to bonds. So this would mean that, or one way we could think about this is that there's going to be a collective human re-understanding or new understanding about the whole bonds market as we go forward August, September, and October. In so doing, it's going to cause huge disruptions for government, which I guess basically depends on the bonds as its source of funds. Now, I don't know what that definition is going to mean, but the way the language is presenting itself, it's very much like we could say the same language appeared in newspapers ahead of the Bretton Woods conference. So at that time, they had to, in the past, and for those who are not aware of this, a bunch of countries got together around World War II and decided how to deal with gold and money and the dollar and cross border settlements after the war was over. So just before the war was over, when they knew that they were going to win, all of the guys that were in the alliance there against the Axis countries got together and decided, okay, this is how we're going to do things after we're done with this war business. And we have that same kind of prescient language now relative to the bonds. So it would be my supposition that there's going to be some kind of a meeting or some kind of a thing, a get together and a consensus, new consensus that will arise, that will participate in this 3 months of very much more chaotic language than we've got now. And that will be right to the heart of the economic system. And I think that part of that is being foreshadowed, if you will, in the chaos that we're seeing in all of the language that affects money. It's not just YouTube, it's not just the social media. We have rise in chaos language for funds managers, for pension, for real estate. All of this is actually manifesting now. So I was spot on that. The chaos hit us around the middle part of March.
You sure
actually
were.
A little early.
You sure were.
And it'll continue through May without any abatement. And then we'll get a slight bit of release from it through June and July. And then, as I say, we've got this redefinition that's going to be coming upon us in August, September, and October that's going to cause real problems relative to government. And so if I had to like get it down to concise sort of an understanding, I don't think we'll have a stock market crash. I think we'll have a government crash or a Fed bank crash or something, something that we're, everybody's saying, oh, well, when's the market going to crash? And I'm saying I don't think it'll be meaningful, because by the time the market crashes, nobody will care, because before we get there, the Fed will crash, because the Fed is the market, basically.
And I wanted to get back to the dollar. So you had some language in here about the dollar, that we would have problems with the U.S. dollar, currency crisis. That would that right. play in with your government? So you're saying that separate from this, crash of governments, as you're calling it, you're talking about a currency crisis. Can you talk about that? A dollar crisis. Dollar's the preeminent currency in the world at the moment. And so you're talking about there's going to be some kind of a dollar crisis as well, a couple of steps down in the value of the dollar is what I read in the report. Can you explain that?
Sure. The macroeconomic environment outside of the United States at the moment would tend to suggest that the dollar is going to rise because the euro is dying. European Union is not a healthy union. It is not a healthy organization. It has got internal problems. Everybody on the outside can say this doesn't look like it will end well. And so that would technically be good for the dollar. However, the data sets are suggesting that that the dollar will basically not. It may gain in relative value to the euro as the euro dies, but that this is not a good thing, and that the dollar itself is on its way out or is dying. And this is again part of this whole like crash of the Fed sort of a thing, right? Now the currency crises we have exist now. And we're seeing those with the Bitcoin. We saw a lot of the language with the altcoins in the chaos and so on as they've gone through these major rises and crashes. These are symptomatic of the other currencies, the paper currencies or the sovereign currencies, because they're all digital anymore. But the sovereign currencies having value issues. So in other words, Bitcoin would not rise in value against the US dollar if the US dollar was a healthy alternative to Bitcoin. And that's basically if you measure the dollar against the euro, hey, we're looking good. But if you measure the dollar against something real, we're not looking good, and it's the not looking good part that's going to really come to the fore after we get through this little bit of summer.
And that it's a natural transition right here. You got language in your report, and folks, just so you know, this is 42 pages. It's single spaced. It's huge. You should buy the report. I just picked out a few things, but you had one thing here, language about gold fever and a silver rush. Is that people looking for alternative currencies? Is that what you're seeing along with Bitcoin? And you have said before that Bitcoin is a good market because they can't manipulate Bitcoin like they can gold and silver. But is the same thing happening? People are looking for stores of wealth and currency, gold and silver, or not?
Correct. It's the I can't think of the guy's name. I mean, you probably know. It's like Gresham's law. Good money always you always hoard the good money and spend the bad, right? And so that's exactly what's going on. We're at a point now where people recognize that, people that don't think about finances, who usually just go to work and their only real issue with finances is how much they're paying for gasoline that week, right? They don't really think about it long term. But even those individuals are now thinking, they're, it's like the herd. They're out there sniffing the wind, and they sense that opportunity change there. And so the language I monitor, and actually, if you wanted a real world metric, go and talk to the people that produce gold pans and sluice boxes and this kind of thing. They've never been busier in the last 20 years. I've actually contacted one guy who said, don't talk about this anymore. I can't keep up with it. And it was like, okay, but he was joking. But it's actually a real world metric. People are now understanding that, oh look, there actually is, at least on the West Coast in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and this kind of thing. There are places where you can just go and sweep the sand out of culverts underneath overpasses and stuff in the mountains, in the roads, and take that sand home and pan it and get gold out of it. And there are people that are doing this. If you'll notice, there's been a big uptick in everything that people can do at an individual level to try and make a living. And so there's a lot more people out there using the little metal detectors trying to recover anything value out of the ground that's been dropped. I mean, we're seeing a huge rise in basically activity relative to economics, where a small investment might pay off for you in some other way if you add labor to it.
And this is, but back to your gold fever. The gold fever is, you're talking that they could lose control of the pricing, the manipulation of the gold market, that the powers that be, the deep state as it were, could lose the control of the pricing of the silver market, or take it and turn it around and send it to the moon. I mean, is that what you're talking about with gold and silver prices? You're talking about scarcity of gold in your report, that you can't buy it, that you can't find it, that there's a silver rush or silver, what do you call it? Silver
Boom.
rush and gold fever? Silver rush and gold fever. Explain it.
That's really what it is. It's
silver rush and gold fever. Go ahead.
And it's just like it's just going to be emotionally very much like 1979 or so, before we got into the Reagan era. And I don't know if you remember those first 3 months after the Reagan inauguration, how there were long lines at all the coin shops. There was a real gold fever. People were starting to panic that they had no gold, that all they had were paper dollars. And there was that panic around the dollar itself. And we've got a lot of that language now, and that all supports the gold and silver. Now, the issue with silver and gold is very, very multifaceted, because the silver and gold markets have been suppressed. In order to suppress, an emotional energy has to be pushed down on that market and maintained there. This is the metaphor of the beach ball being held underneath the rising tide is very precise and very accurate relative to the emotions. And it's my contention that the emotional weight that they've had to push down on gold and silver is breaking loose. And when it goes, there will be a bit of a flutter, and then they'll push down harder, and then it's just going to blow. And where the language is suggesting that is really happening around silver, and that silver may indeed be the kind of like final little bit of air that pushes that beach ball back up and it bounces way high. There's all kinds of language in the data sets about gold going no offer in the United States, and fundamentally about the breakdown of the
stop for a minute. I'm going to interrupt you here. I'm going to get no offer so people understand. No offer. In other words, and I have on my site, I have Discount Gold and Silver, and I'm not trying to plug them, but they're the totally honest people, right? And I was talking
they're good guys.
And I was talking to the owner at Melody Cedarstrom, and I said, when this thing starts getting $100 up days, I mean, you're going to play the market with your inventory, right? I mean, you're not going to be selling gold one day and then next day it's going to be $100. And she said, "Oh yeah, no, I couldn't do that. I'd have to wait. I'd have to hold." Is that what you're talking about? That's
exactly what it is.
Sellers are going to say, no, we're not selling. Sorry, it went $100 yesterday and the day before and the day before. We're not selling anything. Is that what you're talking about? Explain.
That's exactly the same kind of thing we're seeing now in Bitcoin. And it's like the people say, "No, I'm not going to sell my Bitcoin now. It went up $100 yesterday. It might go up another 100 today." And that's exactly what's going to go on at the mercantile level, at the merchant level within the retail markets for gold and silver. I don't get in a lot of data about the wholesale market. It's not so large that there's that much discussion. I suspect it'll also happen there, and I suspect it'll happen there slightly ahead of the retail market. That, the guy that's going to have to tender 50 tons of gold, he's going to be really concerned about the premium, whereas the guy who's selling 2 ounces isn't going to be that concerned. And but it'll ripple down to retail, and it may well hit us over this summer.
So people just won't sell their gold and silver. People are just going to, at some point, people are going to go, "Nope, not going to sell it." And then the price will have to go up to get somebody to budge to sell. Is that what you're saying?
And that's fundamentally it. And at some point, we'll cross a threshold where people will say, "No, I'm sorry, I won't take that green paper there, but I'll swap you my gold for that motorcycle or something, whatever."
Yeah, I had this idea, and I don't know if you'll you research it, but I think some people say, "Oh, they're going to confiscate gold." I don't think so. I think what Trump would do
can't be done.
Well, I would think he would say this. He would say, "You know what? We're going to, like some states have done, we're going to allow you to go buy a car or a house. And the only thing is the gold has to come back to the bank, and the Fed will, control it. But we're not going to criminalize you. We're not going to, make you out to be a Patriot Act, file a Patriot Act on you. We're not going to tax you. But we want your gold. So go buy a house, go buy a car, go buy a motorcycle, go buy a TV, and the stores will be set up to take that gold and silver." They could do that at a car dealer, and they could sure do that at a closing table, could they not?
They could. I don't know whether it'll actually evolve out that way. Okay, because there's a couple of other problems involved. That has the assumption that government survives, and I don't know that that's the case anymore. I think we're going to have maybe the first ever global government or governance crash here this coming fall. That is to say, an economic crash that takes government out because government's the problem, because it's basically killing itself and killing all of us with its economic policies. I don't know what will occur, but I doubt really that we'll have the ability to take our coins in gold and silver into the local store and have them swept up that way. Now, the confiscation issue is entirely different, okay? Everybody says, oh, the government confiscated gold in the 1930s. And no, they did not. They simply paid everybody the going price for the gold, actually a little bit more than it was worth, and they bought the gold. They didn't confiscate it. Then the Federal Reserve raised the price on gold in order to create inflation. It was their only mechanism for creating any inflation whatsoever. And the way they were able to do that, though, was that there was a mechanism whereby people were used to dealing in both dollars and gold. They were interchangeable. You could turn one in and get the other, and so on. Plus, there were two other elements involved. Gold could be insured and used as a backing for a loan. So banks held a lot of people's gold, and it could be insured. Therefore, insurance companies knew where it was at, and so the government had listings of it. Neither of those conditions exist here today. You can't get a loan on gold, and you can't insure gold in your house, that kind of thing. So there's no records of who has the stuff. So confiscation is out the door. Plus, there's no real reason for the government to try and get the little ones and twos that individuals have. If they need silver, they'll go to J.P. Morgan, give them a sheet of paper, and take all the silver that they've got in the vault. That's just the way it'll go, because they collected all the silver and they know where it's at. So it won't quite be that way. Now, I do suspect that there will be some form of an exchange system that develops that will be able to convert your gold and silver into meaningful other forms of digital currency. Will it be a digital dollar? I don't know. Bitcoin will exist and other digital currencies will exist. So maybe that's the mechanism that we'll have once the dollar system crashes. And I also am of the opinion that they know that this system is coming down. And so that's why there are no laws against Bitcoin. That's why they're just trying to control and regulate it and take advantage of it and not outlaw it. It's because they know that we need something as a replacement when the system goes down.
So you think they know full well that the system is going to crash?
I think that they are aware of that. I also think they may see the same thing I see, that there's two possible ways out. And so if we don't do anything, the system will crash. If they do a number of different other things or allow a number of different other things to occur at a macroscopic level, those actions may cause the system to crash faster, because this is a multi-year process. But I am of the opinion that the powers that be are well aware of this, and you see this in their activities. We see macro world examples of this that provide proof of our thinking. We have billionaires buying bunkers, islands, planes, keeping planes hot so they can take off at a moment's notice, all of this kind of thing. So the ultra wealthy are very, very jittery and have no sense of confidence in their lifestyle being maintained by the system that they've created. Ergo, they think the system is on its way out.
And you think this isn't just going to be a USA problem or a European breakup problem. This is going to be a global governance crash.
Correct. It won't hit Russia. It won't hit places like India as much. It won't really impact Africa as much. It'll do a lot of damage to us. It'll really destroy Europe. It's going to really impact China. And it will also go on down into Southeast Asia to some extent. Some weird, in our data sets, some places seem relatively immune from it. They're going to have their own form of a brouhaha, dust up, some level of contention. And these are places like Australia. Australia is going to have all kinds of government problems, but they're not really going to have the same kind of problem that we have in the U.S. and in Europe. So there are going to be areas that more or less come through it, not intact, but with the same operational paradigm. I don't have that same operational paradigm stuff within our data sets. Now, if I go back far enough in some of our data, and some of the reports that are maybe a year and a half old, you'll notice there was language in there, and this is long before Trump had any kind of an ascendancy in the Republican machine. But there's data sets in there about a coming period of time when within the United States there was going to be a state versus state negotiations or minor level of confrontation around resources and assets and so on.
You mean like Nevada against California?
Correct. Or, Ohio and Illinois against New York State, that kind of thing. And both at a federal level over distribution of resources, paper resources, debt, and so on, but then also at a very practical level, state to state, as we all sort of, and these language sets were basically describing a period of time in which the federal government was far less powerful than it is at this moment. Now, these data sets were long-term data, and they were at the far edge of that, and they were about 3 years out at the time that they were projecting. Well, that 3 years, from about 19 months through to the end of the 3 years, would begin sometime this fall. So those data sets may be indeed referring to how the states are going to get along with each other once the federal government is no longer the big dog on the block.
And do you see violence with this breakup of government in state versus state, in country versus country? Do you see violence in the streets that people are going to have to arm themselves?
Oh yeah, that's all over. That's all over the place. It's been in our data sets for a long time. And again, I'm putting that down to this unknown energy from space that has all of humanity really jittery at the moment. This was called the Solilunius by Gurdjieff in the 1800s. Or early 1900s, I forget. Anyway, so yeah, there's going to be this kind of strife and violent out. It's an expression, okay? It's like he's acting out. It's very much that. A lot of individuals are simply going to be acting out against the nervousness that's in their system. They're going to be expressing it. They don't know why. It'll come out as violence. So we don't have a whole lot of stuff in our data, for instance, about an American Spring and a giant revolution and a pushback and a civil war and all of that. We don't have that. It's much more chaotic, much more sporadic, much far less organized.
Individual on individual.
Exactly. And people that are, you get into a mob and there's that mob mentality that forms and that kind of thing. And there's going to be responses to that. But the interesting part of all of this is that there is a growing level of language for a number of people that wish to step out of the confrontation between the two tribes, watch it go on and act as not moderators, but calming agents, if you will, to try and calm down all the stuff going on. Now, the good news for me, from my perspective, looking at the data, is that in spite of all of the contention between people and all of the energies that are pushing us that way, we have some really cool stuff coming, which is that we have an ice age. We have unknown energies from space. We have all of these environmental things that are going to impact us, such that humans will have to stop fighting each other, stop focusing that rising Mars energy, if you will, on each other, and focus it outside of humanity on the systems that keep us all alive.
And I wanted to get on to and this with the failing global economy, and I just want to hit this. I just wrote these some notes down. A failing economy, economic woes, unemployment crash, and Fed, and you talked a little bit about this. The Fed and also the regional banks, which you talked about before, which you now added. The Fed is going to be under stress. Does all that combine into one theme? The economy having problems, a failing economy, failing employment crash, and also the local banks and the Fed, a new wrinkle, gets into trouble with debt.
That would be the way I would have characterized it prior to maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, when I started doing some of the post cleanup for this last report and started getting into the data for the next one, because there's been let's just say a meme shift, if you will, relative to that. So yeah, we've got economy problems, we've got economic problems, we've got financial system problems, we have banking problems, but it all turns out, at least insofar as what the data is pointing at, that we don't really have an economic problem. We do indeed have a financial system problem, but the financial system might be able to be self-healing, and all these systems may be self-healing if it weren't for government. And so it really looks like, in terms of what the language is showing us, that as we go through the upcoming fall, we'll get a lot of language coming out about from the people about, okay, what do we really do? Do we really need this government stuff anyway? You know, is there some other way we can manage things that we don't need to have big government? So this is going to be hugely chaotic, because over 10% of our populace works directly for the government, and probably another 20% are directly connected either through benefits, not including Social Security, but also through, the EBT cards and all of this kind of thing. So this will be hugely disruptive to the United States. It'll be hugely disruptive to Western Europe. Not so much Ireland, not so much England or Scotland. It'll be disruptive to Russia, but not internally so, just with us dealing with all of us guys going crazy. Same thing with China and so on, although China has their own internal problems relative to debt. So fundamentally, we're looking at the rollover of the debt iceberg. We're only seeing the 10% that's up at the top, the 90% that is hidden from us. The whole thing is going to roll over, and we're going to be exposed to all of the hidden bits of the debt, and the system will be basically, according to our descriptions here, not functioning. Now, this does not mean in our data sets that we're seeing that everybody stays home. We're seeing vast unemployment that really grows through the summer as more and more firms are unable to make a go of it and start laying people off. This will be directly related to the things that will go on in the currency crisis. And it's my contention that at an underlying level, it is the currency crises that are forcing the actions on YouTube through the advertisers. And one of the things that you get when you get into a depression is you get a real hard look at where you're spending your money. So prior to a depression, they have what the economists call malinvestment, where people are saying, oh yeah, I'll take a flutter, I'll put a few $1,000s on that thing, and you don't care if it really comes through or not. If it doesn't come through, you write it off on your taxes. If it does come through, you have got some more money to add to something else. So there's this malinvestment because money is cheap and it doesn't cost you much. But when you get into the real depression, all that goes away. All those malinvestment monies, they're gone. You've got no more resources. You've got to take those 2 pennies and you've got to digitally rub them together very hard before you spend them to try and grow a third penny. And so during that period of time, we get to the point where we are very solid about what we put our money in. And this is why those advertisers are basically freaking out on YouTube, is because they're spending hard money on ads and they want control. And so they don't want them up against some other video that they don't want to see their product tied to. They could have accepted that in the looser days of a freer money, but as we go forward, they won't be able to do it. So we're getting into the tightening period of it all, naturally, natively, and on top of that, we're now faced with the debt berg rolling over to the point where, and government's going to be sitting on top of this iceberg, by the way. They're sitting on top of that 10% out there, so they're going to go underwater when this thing rolls over. Realistically, we have individuals that don't know how to manage anything, that have never managed a company or a firm or never grown anything in terms of a business. We call these individuals lawyers and politicians, and we put them in charge of all of us, and they've done a very poor job. Now, we were stupid in letting them try and manage something. We're not as smart as the Chinese. They put engineers and accountants in charge of things, not lawyers. And so we did this very badly, and so now we have to pay for it. And it looks like 2017 and onward is our years of reckoning.
And if you don't have gold and silver and Bitcoin and a car title and food and tangible stuff, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah. It's going to be difficult. Universe always provides. These periods of difficulty, though, we're going to see a great number of people die that the system maintains now, because as the system maintenance degrades, we won't be able to keep a lot of these people on. And so we will see that level of impact on our social order, on our population, and so on. And we have a great deal of this to go through. We have a really terrible time to go through with absolutely no guarantee that humanity will survive. And I say that quite factually. We are at an extinction level event. Now, this extinction level event doesn't relate to our economics. I mean, it controls our economics, it dominates our economics, but it doesn't matter about the dollars or currencies or any of that. Doesn't relate to that. Does not relate to anything. Doesn't truly even relate to the debt. The debt is merely a signpost or a symptom of our underlying problem. And our underlying problem comes down to a single thing, and that is energy. If we don't solve over these next 4 years the energy crises that we're currently in, and it has nothing to do with oil, has nothing to do with the cost of oil or that industry. It has to do with the return on investment of physical calories put into the ground to get oil out. That has crashed. It's come down to a level that is not sustainable. It costs us more BTUs, more physical calories, to get 1 calorie out of the ground in the form of oil than we achieve and usefully work out of it. This is not sustainable for our species. Our species has only gotten to the point where it is now because of what we can think of as basically cheap or free energy. If you used 1 barrel of oil, you could get 50 barrels out of the ground. Well, 49 of those, or 48 of those, are free. You got your barrel back that you put into the ground, and then the others were free, or they're free energy or cheap energy. That doesn't exist anymore, and that's put a real strain on our society. That's why our society is coming apart at the seams, and it's this underlying energy equation that is our death warrant as a species. It'll probably be pulled in the next 4 or 5 years, and it might take us another 20 years to actually die off. And there would be a few remnants, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 breeding pairs of humans around the planet trying to struggle in an ice age. And they may be able to make it because there would be so few people relative to the amount of oil that would be above ground that could use it. But the vast majority of our society cannot make it go. It doesn't pay for us. We can't make it up in volume, right? So if we put in 100 barrels of oil into the ground and we only get back 102 barrels, we're toast. If we only get back, anything less than 200 barrels, for every 100 we're putting in, we're on a very slow slope to extinction, and we're way past that level right now. We're on a very rapid slope to extinction, and if we don't solve the energy issue, now here's our solution, as I was talking about earlier. We have 2 solutions to the problem. We can accept extinction and go quietly, or we can get the guys in the deep holes in the ground to pop out with the free energy devices. And a lot of people say, oh, well, he's a woo-woo crackpot, UFO believer, et cetera, et cetera. And that all of those are perfectly true. Does not make me wrong. There are deep special access projects that have been working on free energy devices for over 50 years, none of which has been shared with us, and we need those now. So it is my contention that within a couple of years, as we go forward here, especially within the United States, especially within what we call USA pop here, things would become so desperate that you would actually have, and we've had very long-term descriptions of this in our data, you would actually have mobs of desperate people marching on places like the hidden underground government bunkers in Maryland, the hidden underground government bunkers around Mount Weather, Area 51, Wright-Patterson, any number of these military bases where we know that there is this technology stashed. Now, a lot of these individuals at that point will simply be going for food. But there will be those individuals that will be going saying, we've got to get this stuff out of the ground if our species is going to survive.
The final question, just quickly, pedophilia. The axe is going to swing on both Democrats and Republicans that are involved in this hideous crime. Is that correct in your data points?
Oh, yes. No question whatsoever. It doesn't matter who you are. That's why there we go.
Go ahead.
I'm losing you on the interconnect.
Go ahead.
Here.
Go ahead. I still got you.
We're going to lose Democrats, Republicans. Are going to lose all of these individuals in your major professions that are lauded and looked at, and celebrities. Okay, a lot of these people are very dirty in this. Sports figures, monarchs, CEOs of businesses. There's a lot of people at the top that are very scared.
And with that, Clif I want to cut it short. Well, we did 40-something minutes. But listen, Clif I, halfpasthuman.com, you can go on there, just scroll down, and you can find the report, Clif I, halfpasthuman.com. The latest report is called